About 150 Hamas terrorists are trapped in tunnels underneath the ground on the Israeli side of the Yellow Line, and the IDF has begun special operations to eliminate them as the political echelon rejects international pressure to allow them to have safe passage back to their own lines. For its part, Hamas is dragging its feet in order to strengthen itself inside Gaza. In diplomatic news, the United States has submitted a draft proposal to the United Nations Security Council to establish an international force in Gaza. A vote on the measure has already been scheduled, and we'll bring you some more details about this. And in other diplomatic news, Qatar's Prime Minister switched sides again this week and attacked Israel. And meanwhile, in the northern arena, Hezbollah is rebuilding its strength, and the IDF is preparing to change course, preparing for immediate escalation against Hezbollah after confirmation that the logistics commander of Hezbollah's southern front has been eliminated. However, there's other trouble that is brewing in the north, as President Erdogan of Turkey is tightening his grip on Syria, as well as getting used to his role as mediator with Hamas. Finally, Iran's bubble might finally be bursting, just like their nuclear ambitions. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm your host Yair Pinto, bringing you all the truth about what's happening here in Israel. There is an escalating situation in the Gaza Strip this week, as about 150 Hamas terrorists who were in tunnels underneath the ground when the ceasefire went into effect are now trapped on, or rather under, the Israeli side of the Yellow Line. There are claims that these individuals did not get the word about the ceasefire and their commanders simply abandoned them to their fate. However, Israel has rejected international pressure to agree to a Hamas demand that these terrorists be allowed safe passage back to their own lines, as they have already launched several attacks against our troops, resulting in fatalities and injuries. Additionally, some of the families of the fallen hostages have spoken up, saying they oppose the idea of allowing these terrorists to go safely to their own lines, and the government has also said that this will not be allowed to happen. And meanwhile, the Nahal Brigade and the combat engineering fighters continue to handle the strategic tunnel in the Jenin neighborhood in Rafah. The IDF assesses that in the tunnel there are about 150 terrorists that are trapped on the Israeli side, who are asking through Hamas and the mediators to return to the side of Hamas inside the Gaza Strip. Speaking in more general terms about the situation in the Gaza Strip, it is apparent that Hamas is dragging its feet regarding implementation of the ceasefire agreement in order to strengthen itself in Gaza. And furthermore, the organization plans to inflate a humanitarian crisis ahead of the winter in order to achieve additional control without disarming. And meanwhile, the terrorist organization is buying time and claims that the return of the remains of the hostages who were murdered in captivity will take weeks, as it also abuses and intimidates Gazan civilians, Palestinians, in a show of force to let everybody know that they're still in control. However, they're not invincible. And this week, 11 Hamas terrorists were eliminated in a giant tunnel in Bet Hanun. Amongst them, field-grade commander-level terrorists. According to the IDF and the Shin Bet, the operation was enabled by the intelligence guidance that gave them the locations. And taking a step back and looking at the big picture, the Trump administration is struggling to assemble the international force for the Gaza Strip, as the Palestinian Authority insists that it receive full international authorization, and Israel opposes a Security Council mandate and the inclusion of Turkey and Qatar in this force in Gaza. Nevertheless, the United States sent a draft resolution to the members of the United Nations Security Council this week, meant to establish the international force in the Gaza Strip. And according to the draft, the force will operate in Gaza for at least 2 years. And a senior American official added that the force should be ready to deploy in the Gaza Strip as early as January. One of the force's objectives is to ensure the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. Therefore, it will also train and provide support to Palestinian police forces that will operate in Gaza after going through screening, vetting, and approval. We will bring you all the details. And in the northern arena, the IDF is preparing for immediate escalation as Hezbollah is rebuilding its strength despite Israel's strikes, which have successfully eliminated several senior terrorists and operatives in recent days. With the end of the war in Gaza, it seems that Hezbollah is motivated to increase its efforts to recover so that it can more effectively threaten Israel's northern border. With this in mind, the IDF and the political echelon have discussed a possible response to the many violations of the ceasefire agreement, which ended the last round of fighting a year ago. But Lebanon is not the only source of trouble for Israel in the north. Neighboring Syria is increasingly coming under the control of Turkey's President Erdogan, who is also getting used to his role as a mediator with Hamas. And this week, Erdogan announced a broad assistance plan in Syria. In his remarks, he emphasized that the state's recovery under the new leader Abu Muhammad al-Julani and attacked Israel, accusing it of disrupting the humanitarian efforts. And speaking of accusations, after accusing Hamas of violating following the attacks on an IDF force in Rafah last week, Qatar's Prime Minister warns that the ceasefire in Gaza remains fragile and complex. But this time he says that it's due to daily violations and disproportionate responses by the Israeli strikes. And further afield, the Ayatollah regime in Iran has made a new threat against Israel, as the Supreme Leader's advisor, Mohammad Javad Laghgiani, claimed that Iran has the technological capability to build an atomic bomb in less than 2 weeks, but emphasized that the matter is forbidden by a religious decree of Khamenei. This double standard and double talk is nothing new, but what's new in Iran? Including even in the regime, the economy is a mess. Pollution and environmental issues are making life impossible in large cities, and the work stoppages, street demonstrations, and protests against the regime have become an almost daily occurrence, despite a brutal police crackdown. Khamenei and his gang are indeed determined to restore the nuclear project and Iranian influence in this region, but the question now is whether or not their followers still have anything left to give, or for how long the ordinary people of Iran will put up with this miserable situation. So we have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about everything that's happening in Israel. This is day 759 of the ongoing war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are operating under the control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. As you might have noticed, we are back to counting the days because it turns out that this war has not ended. And now, more than ever, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey are also part of our very complicated equation in the Middle East. So a moment before we begin, I want to call on you to continue spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Give a click on the like button, because every time we put out one of our reports, the anti-Israel position machine spreads thousands of lies, fake news stories, and anti-Semitic propaganda against Israel in a day. So to fight this, we need to stand for the truth and be ambassadors of the truth. Ambassadors with boots on the ground. So guys, help us spread these reports as far as possible to as many people as possible. And the most important thing that you can do, like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss another Boots on the Ground episode. Now, following the publication about the terrorist organization Hamas and its attempts to extract the terrorists who are stuck on the Israeli side beyond the yellow line on Monday, a political source says that the Prime Minister is not allowing the safe passage of between 150 to 200 Hamas terrorists. The Prime Minister continues in his resolute position of disarming Hamas and demilitarizing the Gaza Strip, while thwarting terror and its threats against our forces. However, Hamas sources revealed that intensive contacts are being conducted, mediated by various actors, with the goal of removing dozens of fighters of the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam brigades who are trapped in tunnels in the Rafah and the Khan Yunis areas in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. According to reports this week in the El Arabiya media portal, the terrorists are in areas currently controlled by Israeli forces. This development comes against the background of the statement by Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday that there are Hamas pockets in the parts of Gaza that is controlled by the Israeli forces, adding that the pockets, mainly in Hamas strongholds in Rafah and Khan Yunis, will be eliminated. So, what exactly is happening in these locations? Before the ceasefire, Hamas deployed forces of terrorists in subterranean networks in Rafah. The IDF is currently trying to demolish tunnels in that large areas, even though these actions sometimes create deadly encounters. But the greater fear is that the temporary will become permanent, that Hamas will remain in power over more than half of the Gaza Strip, and that hundreds of IDF soldiers will be stuck in the coming years in a huge security zone deep inside Gaza's flat, ravaged territory. This concerns the Bnei Shuwaili enclave in southern Khan Yunis, one of two enclaves with a concentration of many dozens of terrorists who remain on the IDF side on the yellow line, in addition to the 200 in Rafah. The Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, recommended to the political echelon to eliminate all of them, to continue locating in these two focal points the terrorist tunnels, and to terminate those inside them. However, in the Rafah enclave, an opportunity arose that Hamas agreed to make an effort to locate additional remains of fallen hostages in exchange for the unharmed release of its 200 operatives there to the Gaza side of the yellow line. However, there is another twist to this story, because in the past 2 weeks, those terrorists who are staying in the Janina neighborhood of Rafah carried out 2 attacks against IDF forces in which 3 soldiers lost their lives. Then Hamas distanced itself from them, and now it is trying to return them to the territory that is under its control. It is important to point out that under the ceasefire agreement, Israel has the right to act against these terrorists on the Israeli side of the yellow line. Also, the contacts are taking place against the backdrop of the current ceasefire that is achieved with the United States mediation and which entered into force on October 10th of 2023. One of those central components is the return of all the remains of the fallen hostages. And in recent weeks, Hamas terrorists were observed in various areas in the Gaza Strip from which the IDF withdrew, searching for remains of Israeli hostages. Israel accused Hamas last week of stalling and manipulating regarding the evacuation of the remains, claiming that Hamas refused to allow its men to accompany the Red Cross teams in their searches. And in addition to the issue of the terrorists and the fallen, the IDF spokesperson published an update last Thursday on the continuation of the fighting in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, conducted step by step with the aim of dismantling Hamas's capabilities. According to the statement, the brigade combat team of the Atzion Brigade in recent weeks completed extensive activity in the Rafah area, where dozens of terrorists were eliminated and terror infrastructures were destroyed. This is happening above and below the ground. And immediately after completing the operations in Rafah, the forces moved to the Khan Yunis area. There, too, significant achievements were recorded, including the destruction of observation means and additional terrorist infrastructures, alongside the elimination of dozens more of Hamas terrorists. The brigade's forces now hold the southern Khan Yunis area in order to preserve the IDF's operational achievements. They deepen control in the area and ensure control over the Magen Oz route, one of the central routes in the fighting in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. The broader context around the future of the Gaza Strip includes additional complex issues, amongst them the disarmament of Hamas, how Gaza will be administered after the war, and coordination to increase humanitarian aid. Also under consideration is the establishment of an international stabilization force that would include Arab and international partners who would operate together with Egypt and Jordan to secure Gaza's borders and ensure the maintenance of the ceasefire. A number of countries have expressed interest in participating in such a force, but demanded a clear mandate from the United Nations Security Council. Ministers from Muslim countries will meet this week in Istanbul to discuss the fragile ceasefire in Gaza and the establishment of an international monitoring force. According to a source in the Turkish Foreign Ministry, foreign ministers of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Pakistan, and Indonesia are expected to participate. The ministers will also discuss the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip and the next phase of the United States-mediated ceasefire deal, which entered into force on October 10th. In addition, we can glimpse a bit of the future, as Hamas is planning to carry out international ambushes against Israel. The intention is to inflate a humanitarian crisis with the winter approaching, with the goal of applying massive pressure on Israel from the countries of this world. In this way, the organization plans to advance its demands to open the Rafah crossing, increasing the flow of supplies into Gaza, and primarily block another IDF operation. And on that note, we see that in a week, 1 month will have passed since the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. And contrary to the understandings to release all the living hostages and the remains of the fallen, or at least most of them within 72 hours, Hamas deliberately delayed the handover process, and it is doubtful that it will complete it at all. What should have taken a few days at most will stretch over about 30 days at least. The terrorist organization did not stop there and tried to simulate the locating of the remains in digging works that it carried out, and at the same time, lies were spread about difficulties in accessing the remains because of the ruins, when these are held by Hamas in places known to it. Hamas senior leaders are publicly saying that the process of returning the bodies will take additional weeks because of those so-called difficulties. In practice, they want at least a full 2 months of relatively quiet in Gaza so that they can rebuild and use this time to regain their control. So this precious time is, of course, dedicated to training the thousands of terrorists who joined the Hamas organization during this war, appointing new commanders in place of those that were terminated, suppressing internal opponents amongst other Palestinians in Gaza, and replenishing cash reserves. In short, accelerated preparation in case that this war resumes. And at the same time, Hamas is distributing instructions to terrorists to beware of targeted assassinations. Amongst other things, they were advised to move in vehicles without ordinary Gazans to avoid strikes, and of course, to avoid using mobile phones as much as possible. It is evident that the organization's senior leaders in Gaza are still maintaining caution regarding coming out of the tunnels and are giving the stage to a lower-level spokesperson. And here, at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in the Gaza Strip, so keep spreading the truth, share, follow us. Most importantly, hit this subscribe button to help us reach more people. This is how the algorithm works. We need your help, guys. Now, I want to speak to you for just a few moments about the economic situation inside Israel. If you watched our show before, then you probably already know about the miracle of Arza. Now, I'm really excited to share this with you that Arza has launched their brand new Hope Box, or Tikva in Hebrew, and it's their most beautiful box yet. And with the release of the living hostages, and please God, the rest soon, this theme of hope couldn't come at a more powerful time for you to join. So every single item inside your Arza box is handmade by local Israeli artisans and family businesses. So with your purchase, you're directly blessing and supporting the people of Israel while bringing the land of the Bible where Jesus walked right into your home. Inside, there's a gorgeous hope necklace with a Star of David, and the map of Israel, delicious foods and spices, and an amazing ceramic dish made by a group on the Gaza border that employs youth with disabilities. They're only selling this box for a few more days, and it's almost sold out. Plus, they just increased our discount, so you will get 15% off with the code TBNIL15. So, if you love Israel, or you know someone who does, this is the perfect way to experience and to share the beauty and the hope of this land. Just go to arzabox.com/TBNIL and get yours today. Again, that's arzabox.com/TBNIL and use the coupon code TBNIL15. Now, switching our focus to the diplomatic arena. On Monday evening, the United States submitted a draft resolution to the United Nations Security Council members calling for the establishment of an international security force in the Gaza Strip for a period of at least 2 years, concluding at the end of 2027 with a possibility of an extension. According to this report in Accuses, The draft would grant the United States and the participating state a broad mandate to administer Gaza and provide security in that location. An American official noted that the force would be enforcement force, not a peacekeeping force, and that negotiations on the draft will begin in the coming days, with the aim of voting on it in the coming weeks and deploying initial forces in Gaza as early as January. The international forces rules would include securing the Strip's borders with Israel and Egypt, protecting civilians and humanitarian corridors, as well as training and partnering with a new Palestinian police force. The draft stipulates that the force will work to stabilize the security environment by demilitarizing the Gaza Strip, including destroying and preventing the rebuilding of military, terror, and offensive infrastructures, as well as the permanent dismantling of weapons from non-state armed groups, and this implies the disarmament of Hamas if it does not do so voluntarily. The force will also authorize to take all the necessary measures to carry out its mandate in accordance with the international law. To explain further, the international force will operate under a unified command acceptable to the Gaza Broad Police, which will be led by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. The Council is expected to remain in its rule at least until the end of 2027 and serve as a temporary government administration that is responsible for setting priorities and raising funds for Gaza's reconstruction. It will also oversee and support a Palestinian technocratic, apolitical, and skilled committee that will manage day-to-day civil services in the Gaza Strip. The establishment and operation of the force will be carried out in close coordination and cooperation with both Israel and Egypt. Countries such as Indonesia, Azerbaijan, Egypt, and Turkey have already expressed willingness to contribute troops to this force. The delivery of humanitarian aid will be carried out by organizations that will operate in cooperation with the Board of Peace, and any organization that abuses aid or deviates from its purposes will be banned. Now, looking a little deeper, we can see that according to the draft resolution, the International Stabilization Force will report to and directly be subordinated to the International Peace Council, which is chaired by President Donald Trump and composed of senior figures from various countries around the world. According to the draft resolution, the ISF will assist in securing the border areas between Gaza and Egypt and between Gaza and Israel. And the statement from the draft says that it will stabilize the security environment in Gaza by ensuring the process of demilitarizing the Gaza Strip, including the destruction of military and offensive terrorist infrastructures and preventing the rebuilding, as well as the permanent dismantling of weapons from non-state armed organizations. In addition, according to the draft, the ISF will also protect civilians, including within humanitarian aid operations. To this end, the ISF will also train and provide support to Palestinian police forces that will operate in Gaza after being vetted, screened, and approved. All of this activity will be done in coordination with relevant states to ensure humanitarian corridors and carry out additional missions as required to support the implementation of the agreement in Gaza. The draft resolution stipulates that the ISF will be deployed in Gaza under a unified command acceptable to the broad peace. It emphasizes that the establishment and the operation of the force will be carried out in close coordination and consultation with Egypt and Israel. It will also be granted the authority to use all necessary means to carry out its mandate in accordance with the international law, including international humanitarian law. Now, taking a step back and doing a bit of analysis, it is important to point out that the draft resolution welcomes the establishment of the Board of the Peace as a temporary governing body that will set priorities and raise funding for Gaza's rehabilitation until the Palestinian Authority completes its reform plan satisfactorily and after formal approval by the Board of Peace. And according to the draft resolution, the Board of Peace will be responsible for overseeing and supporting a Palestinian technocratic and apolitical committee composed of qualified Palestinian professionals from the Strip, which will be responsible for the day-to-day management of the public service and administration inside the Gaza Strip. A senior American official noted that he expects the Board of Peace to begin operating even before the establishment of the Technocratic Committee. And according to the draft resolution, humanitarian aid to Gaza will be provided through organizations that are operating with the Board of Peace, including the United Nations, the Red Cross, and the Red Crescent. The draft also stipulates that any organization found responsible for humanitarian aid being transferred to the armed groups or misused will be prohibited from continuing to operate in Gaza. The last part is obviously very important and addresses one of Israel's biggest concerns about the distribution of humanitarian aid in the past. However, it is also important to point out that Hamas is not in any hurry to advance to the second stage of this ceasefire agreement, and you can't blame them because in this stage they are supposed to essentially disappear. But they are dragging their feet, returning the remains of hostages because they know that every week that passes, stage 2 of this ceasefire agreement has not begun, the attention of the world and even Israel will be diverted in 1,000 other directions and everyone will forget about Hamas in Gaza. This is exactly what Hamas wants. And we should also consider that this is also good for Hezbollah in Lebanon, as it is rearming and reorganizing itself to be ready for the next round of conflict with Israel. If Israel is distracted by events in the Gaza Strip or with internal issues such as the upcoming elections, all of our enemies get the chance to continue with their plans. Therefore, it seems that Hamas is not rushing in to reach understandings with the Palestinian Authority regarding the composition of Gaza's managing committee. The factions talk in Cairo, meanwhile, continue without breakthrough and without any agreement. The gap between the sides regarding the recognition of the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians remains as is. Until such understandings are reached, Hamas is taking operational steps on the ground intended to clarify who is the boss in the Gaza Strip. For starters, anyone even suspected of collaboration with Israel is executed. Second, Hamas terrorists supervise the activity of gas and food distribution centers and in practice collect taxes from themselves. Third, merchants who raise prices on their own are arrested and put on trial. And finally, even shawarma stands in the south and in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip receive closure orders from the organization's Interior Ministry this week on the pretext that their so-called monopoly on the sale of poultry allegedly caused high prices. These steps are also intended to harm other power sectors in Gaza and to accumulate popularity amongst the masses. It appears to be working by this way as Hamas is as popular as it's ever been. And this is on the Palestinian streets in Gaza. And here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on every development in this matter, so keep spreading the truth and sharing this content. Because this is the only way that we can reach more people with what actually is happening here in Israel. And now we're switching to the northern arena, where this week the IDF struck and eliminated the terrorist Muhammad Ali Khadid, who's a commander in Hezbollah's Radwan force unit in the Nabtia area in southern Lebanon. According to the IDF, this evil man advanced numerous terrorist schemes towards the territory of the State of Israel, and recently he continued attempts to rehabilitate the terrorist infrastructure of the Hezbollah terrorist organization. But he won't be doing that any longer. And in addition, on Monday, troops from the IDF Division 91 and the Air Force struck and eliminated another Hezbollah terrorist in the Aita el-Shayeb area of southern Lebanon. The terrorist was observed attempting to gather intelligence on IDF forces in that area, which is a violation of the ceasefire agreement and more generally, a big mistake. So I've said it before, and I'll say it again. If Hezbollah asks you to go south of the Litani River in Lebanon, do not do this. Avoid this, because if you do, then the IDF will target and terminate you. Sadly, there are many young Lebanese who are not taking this excellent advice, and Israel's intelligence echelon said this week that in recent days, tension in Lebanon has been increasing after the IDF identified more attempts by Hezbollah to restore capabilities in southern Lebanon, as well as to build offensive infrastructure. Because of this, as I know in recent days, rumors of an imminent escalation in the north is taking shape, but the reality is much more complex. Behind the sensational headlines lies a frustration that this could lead to an unexpected move by Hezbollah against Israel. A limited cabinet decision held last Thursday with the participation of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, coalition party leaders, and the heads of the security establishment dealt with this issue, Lebanon, in the shadow of Hezbollah's violations of the ceasefire agreement. In the discussion, the IDF discussed with the political echelon response options against the terrorist organization due to its attempts to rearm, and in the shadow of the inability of the Lebanese army to disarm it according to the new agreement between Israel and Lebanon. So, in the IDF and the Northern Command, they are preparing several response options, including intensified moves against Hezbollah. They will soon be brought for cabinet approval, but as for the timing of their execution, this depends on many variables, including the diplomatic dialogue with the United States and the Lebanese government, as well as additional moves in this region. In any case, Hezbollah's violations and attempts to recover are expected to receive a response from Israel, and since the ceasefire with Hamas 3 weeks ago, the IDF has identified a rise in Hezbollah's self-confidence throughout Lebanon out of an understanding that Israel is facing a regional calm. There is an assumption that Israel will not want to risk this calm by moving against Hezbollah, so they have some breathing room. This high confidence is expressed in increased movement of operatives and commanders of the terrorist organization, including in the border area of south of the Litani River, close to the border with Israel, in order to recover rebuild capabilities and also to regenerate launchers and various weapons, including UAVs, suicide drones. However, the IDF's preventative strikes have become a daily occurrence, but so far Hezbollah is not getting the message, and they are not stopping their activities. They are still trying to rebuild their infrastructure and to regain control of thousands of rockets, missiles, and UAVs, in addition to many thousands of terrorist operatives that they are training. They are still a very dangerous and well-armed enemy, and Israel must remain vigilant against them. And with that in mind, the sea, air, and the land smuggling routes to Lebanon are indeed badly damaged, especially the land routes running through Syria, with the fall of the Assad regime and its replacement by the regime of Abu Muhammad al-Julani, who dislikes Hezbollah and Iran. Smuggling is much more difficult. However, the funding provided by the Ayatollah regime to the Lebanese terrorist organization, even though foiled from time to time, has not stopped, and the IDF says that week by week violations of the ceasefire agreement from about a year ago are only worsening. At the same time, the enemy emphasizes that Hezbollah's force buildup is increasing, while the pace of the organization's disarmament by the Lebanese army, as the government in Beirut committed a few months ago, is becoming slower. A security official said this week that the Lebanese army launched its Shield of the South operation, but in practice, there is quite a bit of cooperation between its officers and Hezbollah, which is not interested in attacking us now and is busy with internal struggles. So, the officials added that if there is no change, we will not be able to stand idle by, despite the successes of this agreement and the enforcement mechanism that is working well under the leadership of the American officers. In any case, preparations for a possible response, including the gathering and the refining of targets as well as the IDF's air defenses, are expected to continue. And here, at Boots on the Ground, we will continue to bring you the truth day by day. So make sure to leave a comment and tell us what you think about all of this. Tell us what you would like to know from Israel, what interests you, so that we'll create videos about that, okay? And make sure to subscribe in the meantime. And now, we're switching our focus once again to the diplomatic moves surrounding the current ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, which was partially achieved through Qatari mediation. So Qatar's Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani gave an interview with CNN's Fareed Zakaria this week, in which he declared that the ceasefire remains very fragile and complex, and also noted that despite the efforts, daily violations occur, where the Israeli strike was disproportionate and almost endangered this whole deal. He emphasized the importance of the joint coordination room with Egypt and the United States, in which all violations are documented. Regarding the day after in Gaza, El-Tahini stressed that the need for an international force with a defined mandate is big, and it needs to be established in cooperation with the United States, saying that the role of the international force should be to ensure security for both the Palestinians and the Israelis alike, so that neither side poses a threat to the other. He clarified that these forces would operate as a guarantor and a protector in the background, while a Palestinian interface, including a police force and a Palestinian administration, would be responsible for security and day-to-day management in the Gaza Strip. He also said no one expects an Arab or an Islamic force to go there and to shoot at Palestinians. This last comment graphically expressed one of the most basic problems with this plan, that the international force must come from somewhere, but the countries that are Arab or Islamic don't want to use forces against the Palestinians. However, any troops who are not from the Arab or the Islamic countries will be seen as out of order if they were to use force against the Palestinians. So there really isn't any good options here, and this dilemma is probably the weakest point in the plans that were offered by President Trump and the international mediators. Now, getting back to El-Tahini, he also spoke about Iran's nuclear program, expressing support for diplomacy to ensure an Iranian nuclear program under supervision, and regarding criticism of Qatar's business and its connections with senior United States officials and general U.S. security guarantees, El-Tahini clarified that there is no connection between the issues and that relations with the United States are strategic and broad. They include the presence of over 10,000 American soldiers and American educational institutions and energy companies in Qatar. He concluded that the security guarantees is only proof of the strategic relations between Qatar and the United States. This is pretty amazing to hear. What do all of you think about this? Let me know. What do you think about the relationship between the United States and Qatar? And a moment ago, we mentioned Iran, and there was more news out of that country this week, as Mohammad Javad Laghgiani, the senior foreign affairs advisor to Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei, declared that Iran has the capability to produce an atomic bomb within less than 2 weeks. However, according to him, this is prevented only by Ali Khamenei's religious ruling, which is forbidding the development of nuclear weapons. This double talk and gaslighting coming out of the Ayatollah regime in Tehran is old news, but we cannot ignore it. Iran stands today before a new reality, as it has not yet recovered from the humiliating defeat that it suffered in the 12-day war, not to mention its many other setbacks in recent years. Most notably, the regime has completely lost the trust and the support of Iran's people. Instead of being a regional power, it is becoming both regionally and globally isolated, sinking into economic ruin and environmental collapse. But the regime remains obsessed with its hatred for Israel, and it appears to be willing to continue sacrificing every other objective in pursuit of our destruction. At the moment, it appears to have moved to a phase of cautious waiting, and Israel must ensure that Iran will never again become a nuclear threshold state. And here, at Boots on the Ground, we will continue to bring you every day all the truth about what's happening here in Israel. Currently, I'm in Jerusalem, as you can see the background. We want you to share this with as many people as possible to help us win this battle of deception and the truth to go out from Jerusalem to the nations. So, what's the best thing that you can do? You can pray. You can pray with us. Pray for the people of Israel, for wisdom to our leaders, to your leaders. Make sure to pray and ask God's will to be done here in this land of Israel, in the Middle East, and in your land. Make sure to pray for the hostages as they are getting back to their lives, getting used to being out of tunnels. It's a tough process. They need all the prayer that they can get. They are recovering physically and mentally and emotionally. Let's keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem and for God's will to be done here in this land. Thank you so much for joining us. Keep praying.
Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.